This is 2024's Miller's Girl. Warning! Spoilers ahead! Cairo is seen sitting at her laptop trying to come up with something to write about, but it's clear she's suffering from a bit of writer's block. She speaks about how she's 18 years old, but she's not sure how that transforms her into an adult. In the morning, she walks to school as she talks about her dreams of writing, and she sees this as her way to escape her meaningless life. Meanwhile, Jonathan Miller makes his way to his classroom to prepare his lesson for the students. Yep, it's one of those kind of movies, and you can tell fairly early on when Cairo shows up for his class an hour early. Well, here we go. The two of them hit it off fairly easily, and this probably marks the downfall of John. John is impressed by Cairo, but they're interrupted when Cairo's best friend Winnie shows up for class and takes her away to get food from the cafeteria. John takes this chance to snoop through Cairo's books, and he's impressed to see that she has one of his oldest books. Just then, another teacher, Boris, shows up, and he snoops through Cairo's books as well to see she has even more of John's books. That evening, John tries spending some time with his wife, Beatrice, but she's really caught up in her writing. He manages to get a few seconds of her time to talk about Cairo having his books, but when she receives a work call, John decides to use music as a way to pull Beatrice back to him. So, this movie has some really dirty dialogue. John and Beatrice are really into filthy romance novels, and it turns out that that's the kind of stories he writes too. After he recites some dirty lines from a book, Beatrice melts like butter in his arms, but this is no match for work, whoever Amy is. The next day, John and Boris sit at the track and sip coffee while staring into the forest, but suddenly Cairo walks out of it. After sharing one of his homemade biscuits with Cairo, Boris goes his own way and leaves John and Cairo to their conversation. Instead, Winnie tries to make a move on Boris, and Cairo watches from the sidelines as Boris seems to fall for her tricks. Winnie comes over to help Cairo write her Yale admissions essay, but Cairo doesn't think that she's done anything exciting enough to make herself stand out. Winnie dares her to experience something worth writing about, and this naturally turns into her daring Cairo to seduce one of her teachers. Yes, because when we think we're boring, it's perfectly normal to think about home-wrecking someone through a large age gap just to spice things up. Of course, blame goes both ways, but it starts somewhere. In this instance, it's Winnie's fault. Winnie tells Cairo that she notices the way John looks at her, and after realizing this, Cairo seems to like the idea of coming on to him. At school, she starts to notice his gaze resting on her, and his eyes seem to tell her something that his voice won't. Then, John tells Cairo to meet him after class, and Cairo seemingly confirms that she wants his attention. After class, John reminds Boris about coming over for dinner that evening, and he does a little jig before leaving. Once alone, John starts dancing around his classroom a bit, but he's embarrassed after seeing Cairo is there. The two of them talk about her plans for college, and he decides to talk to her about her rather exceptional writing. He gives her a special assignment to write about her favorite author, and she immediately starts quoting John's romance novel. If you're going to butter up an author, the sure way to do it is to quote his own book back to him. John doesn't even seem like the teacher anymore. Just another guy in the room now. After seeing why he stopped writing, Cairo calls him out for being uninspired, but then Winnie shows up to pull Cairo away. That evening, John and Beatrice meet Boris for dinner, and suddenly, Winnie shows up as their waitress. How is Winnie everywhere and doing everything? She's a high school student with a 4.4 GPA. How does she have time to work and lounge about in Cairo's house without studying? As the evening goes on, Beatrice becomes very vocal about why she doesn't think that John is a real writer, and he's surprised to hear that she thinks he's better suited to teach than to write. John is extremely upset to hear what she really thinks about his career. That weekend, Cairo heads to a Victorian home where John said that there was a poetry reading happening, and she's hoping that she'll see him there. Suddenly, John pops up and whispers a quote in her ear. John seems very in tune with the poetry being read, and he and Cairo seem to get closer by the end of the event. One school day, John and Boris sit at the track before school again, and Cairo shows up out of the woods with coffee for everyone. Once again, Boris leaves the two of them alone, and they can't help but make eyes at each other. Wait, is this a high school or a community college? Cairo is smoking with the teachers? This is probably the most lax high school I've ever seen. Towards the end of the day, Beatrice messages John to come home so they can get down and dirty, but Cairo decides to stop by his class while he's packing up with Winnie. Cairo tries to get John's approval for her chosen author, but she chooses an author that he's not even allowed to teach. The conversation ends in awkward silence, and after John leaves, Winnie exaggerates what she saw Cairo act like. While Winnie is doing her act, Boris walks in while she's laying on the desk, and he tries to talk to Cairo about getting their help designing a logo. Of course, Winnie is all about this idea, and she gives him hers and Cairo's phone numbers so they can go over the specs. Then she puts his phone in her bra, and he's at a complete loss of words when she gives it back to him. What do you do at this point, though? Do you confront them on your own? Do you go tell someone higher up? What would you do? Later at John's house, Beatrice is still too busy working to leave for their weekend trip, but John finds out that Cairo's phone somehow ended up in his bag. Since Beatrice is taking so long to get ready, John decides to head to Cairo's house to drop her phone off to her. Once there, John seems hesitant about going in, but then he sees Cairo come out in a stunning gown, and he stands out in the rain taking it all in. The two of them end up kissing in the rain, and I can't believe that it was only a kiss. Once you've gone that far, you kind of expect it would have kept going. Nope. Better yet, Cairo actually submits her paper to John after this, and the lines between reality and fiction seem to be blurring as things are loosely interpreted. Did they or didn't they? Why is there a spider? Apparently, she's such a good writer that he decides to pleasure himself while reading her story. I didn't need to see that face. Later at school, Cairo is in class already when John arrives, but she notices a change in his attitude. He tells her that she has to redo her paper since this story is inappropriate, but she tries to show him there's a real meaning behind her paper which leads to real feelings. John tries to tell her that he won't accept her story or the possibility of them pursuing anything in real life. She can't believe that he's going back on his feelings at this point, but he lays down the law by reminding her that he's the teacher and she's the student. After hearing him say this, Cairo thinks that the real issue isn't her writing, but his, and he laughs at her. Cairo is furious now, though, and she puts his failed writing career in the spotlight of the conversation. She's got a point. Cairo definitely has a way with words, and now she's blackmailing him. I'd say he's run out of options at this point, and Cairo is the captain of the ship now. I've never seen a character belittled so well before. I actually feel how small they're trying to make John. After saying her piece, Cairo walks out of the classroom and she leaves John there to think about what she said. When John gets home, he simply tells Beatrice that he had a bad day, but Cairo is at her house drinking and sobbing with Winnie. Winnie thinks that Cairo might still be into John, but Cairo assures her that he's just an imitation of what she thought he really was. Back at John's house, he opens up with Beatrice about his bad day, and he reads the story to her. Beatrice doesn't seem to care too much about the hidden meaning, though, and she decides to get frisky with him. Meanwhile, Cairo wants Winnie to distract her by texting Boris dirty texts, but what she doesn't know is that Boris has just arrived at John's house for a get-together. Boris actually tries to shut down the conversation, but Cairo steps her game up by making out with Winnie and taking a photo to send to Boris. Cairo went from being the student with a school teacher crush to the mastermind who is hell-bent on revenge by making out with her best friend who is a little sad that she didn't really want to do it and submitting a paper to the principal to get John in trouble. What a drastic character change. Just then, John gets a call from the principal who wants to have him sign an incident report regarding the paper, and when John explains to Beatrice that this could lead to Cairo convincing everyone that some of the stuff that's in the story actually happened, Beatrice starts to get a little more concerned about the situation. Now, she questions John about the validity of any of the things in the story, but he denies all of it. The next day at school, Cairo doesn't show up for class, but Winnie definitely seems to be more somber than her usual self. She comes up to John after the bell rings, and she asks him if he's seen Cairo at all. It turns out that neither of them have seen her in a while, and while Winnie seems sad and confused about everything, John calls her out for knowing much more than she lets on. As for Cairo, she's already in the office giving her side of the story. John really tries to do as much damage control as he can without straight up lying, but it's not looking good for him. At the very least, I'd see him being asked to leave the school and transfer somewhere else. Cairo isn't really lying or anything either. They had an inappropriate closeness, and she's just putting it out there for the principal to interpret how she will. It's bad enough. When it comes to the part where they tell what happened with the phone returning situation, John realizes that he's in a bigger hole than he can dig out of. After the meeting, John tells Boris what's been going on, and he tries to throw Boris under the bus for him being inappropriate too. Boris makes sure that John knows that there's a line, and Boris admits that while he toes the line, he is responsible enough to never actually cross it like he did. Boris ends up leaving John alone with his thoughts, and John heads home to talk to Beatrice next. He tells her that he's been suspended, and he assures her that he never got physical with her. Beatrice realizes that this may be true, but there's so much more than that. She realizes that he loves the adoration that Cairo gave him, and she knows he got swept up in giving her affection because of it. These two are about as dysfunctional as a tame married couple could be, though. She continuously puts him down and calls him a mediocre human, and he's doing absolutely nothing to make her feel a certain way ever. I'm surprised they're still sticking it out with each other here. Beatrice calls John the villain of his own story, and she pours herself yet another drink after saying it's the only way she can tolerate being around him. John can't stand how Beatrice acts towards him, and she simply tells him to write about it since it's something he knows so well. Meanwhile, Winnie goes to visit Cairo, and she asks why she's doing all of this to John. Winnie begs her not to go forward with this, and she tells her that she'll testify against her. After hearing this, Cairo says that she'll incriminate Boris as well if she stands in her way, and she feels like this is her greatest achievement in life so far. She goes back to her book to read what she's finished writing, and it turns out that she's been planning for this to inspire John the whole time. Really? She was wanting him the whole time, but she was also expecting things to go this way at some point? The face they give each other as they walk up the steps to the Board of Education pretty much says it all. All of a sudden, Cairo's story exposes the fact that she does feel like a victim, but not of John, of her own circumstance and emotions. Then the credits roll. What? I understand that it tried to take a common concept that is usually played down to its base animalistic virtues and make it poetic, but it definitely lost it somewhere along the way. This went from being a taboo romance film to being a thriller revenge film to being a true crime law movie. Great acting, but definitely needed more story-wise. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next, and I'll see you in the next video.